G'day, I'm Greg and welcome to Rev Shed Performance. Today we're going to talk about some of the different intake manifolds that came on Australian Clevelands. Particularly we've got a 4V, we've got the small port 2V 4 barrel, we've got the small port 2V 4 barrel, we've got a couple others here that we're going to have a look at. There's a few different versions of 4 barrel manifolds that we saw on the 302 and the 351 Cleveland here in Australia, and we saw the same combinations on the 351 Cleveland here in Australia. Obviously we didn't see a 302 4V Cleveland here in Australia, or not obviously, for those of you that don't know, we didn't see a 302 proper 4V large port Cleveland here in Australia. And to the best of my knowledge, Ford Australia never brought in the Boss 302, but I could be corrected on that. When I say brought it in, as a dealer available factory sale is what I'm talking about. If I remember right, Alan Moffat used to race a Mustang with a Boss 302 on it. But that said, I'll pause you, I'll bring you into a better position so you can get a better look, and I do apologise that some of these manifolds are black and they're not as easily visible as what I would like them to be, but I don't have hours to clean stuff up and paint it and make it pretty just for a video. I've got other things that I have to do, unfortunately, so you get the time that I can spare for you, unfortunately, and I apologise for that, but let's get on with the real world. Now, to the best of my knowledge, we're going to cover all of the factory intake manifolds that went on Cleveland's. When I say all of the basic configurations anyway. This one here is a 4V large port that came off a XA GT 4-door sedan. Before anyone starts running around and going, oh, have you got the heads? The heads are stuff. They ended up on a boat motor, and they have rusted through the exhaust ports, and they're just horrible. We'll probably cut that one up and we'll do it when we have a chat on 4V cylinder head ports. But what you'll notice here is the difference in the intake port width between these two, this early Australian 2-barrel small port Cleveland head intake manifold. You will notice that the bolt pattern, the port sizes, everything is identical. I haven't bothered taking that off because it looks pretty much exactly like what's under there by memory. I'll just, because that there was the heat riser for the auto choke on the Motorcraft 4-barrel head, 4-barrel carb head, 4-barrel carburettor. Motorcraft Autolite 4-barrel carburettor, if you had one. If you weren't, then they were blanked off. Actually, in Australia, the later ones, we actually used a loop on through the exhauster for a manifold, if I remember right. But either way, that said, notice the width here and here. It's noticeably different. The this one here is the later spread bore, which we got with the Carter Thermoquad carburettor. So this is actually a late version of this manifold. I've got a early version to show you in a little bit. So the first through to basically the last, this manifold style of manifold was current right up to the last of the XEs, the Ford F-Series, the last of the Ford F-Series. This is what we saw. I don't know what either of these came off specifically. I haven't been bothered looking at production dates to find out. But either way, what we will do is we'll take my trusty cylinder head section out, and we will turn this intake over. Take our aluminium casting out. We will take this intake manifold over. Oop. We'll reposition that so we don't throw it off the side of the bench. Okay. Underneath, you'll notice that the Australian manifolds are different. Now, you'll also notice something else about it. This one here looks to be a little bit oily. This one here looks pretty dry. We've got a better example of what's going on over there. This one here is all rusty. Now, we'll deal with that in more depth later on. And now, so I'm going to pause you move these manifolds. Actually, I'm not going to move them because I think you can see them well enough for what I want to talk about. All right, you'll notice the difference in port size. The Australian manifolds, again, we're back to where we were. They are port-wise, again, they are identical. You can swap these manifolds between motors, it doesn't matter. This one here has the same bolt pattern. It can bolt onto 2V heads, and there's a story about that that we're going to tell in a little bit. And when we start talking about that, we will get into it a bit deeper. But what I'm also going to talk about, I'm going to flip this manifold over. I'm going to move that. I'm going to put that back under there. What I want you to have a look at carefully is the way these runners, these intake runners are. So here we've got the low two, outer, outer, inner, inner. Looking at the top side, so these are the low ones, these are the high ones. We have outer, outer, inner, inner. Now, when I get into the aftermarket manifolds, we'll deal with that in more depth because those manifolds I've written on, it's easier to see what I'm going to be talking about with firing sequence. But again, with the 4V manifold, outer, 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 inner, 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 inner. So when we look at the layout of the manifolds, the difference is port size and, depending on what's going on, carburetor flange. Now, I'm going to get this intake manifold out of the way. And I'm going to put this horrible one up here. This is the early spread bore manifold, and it's bloody horrible. Look at how all they did was they took pretty much this bolt pattern, or this bore pattern, and put a chamfer on it so the throttle butterflies cleared, and there was an adapter on here. There was an AGR plate went on the top of these. Hence the reason this is all full of choked up with EGR, which is why they blocked these off, and then we ran an external heater to the choke on the carburetor off the exhaust manifold. But they just put a bit of a chamfer on it. It's just horrible. When they went to that, that's better. So this one here came off a early XC 351. I know that because I've got the motor. This one here I don't know. Now, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the 4V manifold. Well, again, you can see the difference in the ports. But what we'll do is we'll get rid of this large port 4V manifold. Now this here will be a manifold, get my finger out, that most of our American friends would recognise, being the 2V 2-barrel manifold. This one here is the Australian one. This one came off a 302, which there was a lot of them built. Just take those two bolts out. You'll notice that the front, actually that's in remarkably good condition. It is a long time since I've seen one of these in such good condition. I don't remember, apart from new ones, I don't remember ever seeing one in condition that good for probably 30 years. Probably because it's never been used, looking at the water paths. But that said, notice how this is considerably larger at the manifold than it is at the carburettor face, and it's actually quite a nicely tapered adapter. Now, the actual rest of the manifold isn't that different. When you look at them side by side, there's very little difference on it. It's got the 2 bolts, same as what that has. If we rip that off, we're going to find the preheater here for the two-barrel carburettor. If it was going to for the not for the EGR, for the auto choke, if it was used. So yeah, that's the major differences. The port sizes, everything's the same. We'll flip that over in a second, but I'm going to get this manifold out of the way because it's getting it. It's in the way. So we'll turn this manifold over. I'm going to try not to get too dirty on this manifold because it has one of my major bugbears. It has been off and put back on by someone who, in my opinion, doesn't know what they are doing. So I'll turn this one over. Right, the difference between these two manifolds underneath get this to sit properly. Sorry folks. Okay, this 2-barrel manifold doesn't have the ribs that the 4-barrel manifold has, the small port 4-barrel. But you'll notice a major difference. This one is rusty. This one is covered in shit and gunk and crap. And the reason is, it's had, in this case, paper composite gaskets on it. And you'll notice, hopefully, this one here is actually one of the better gaskets because this one here is relatively thin. And being relatively thin, it hasn't drawn much oil through it, but they are oil wetted. I have a real bugbear with these gaskets. I have replaced hundreds of them, usually the thicker ones. The thicker they are, the more room they have to compress over a period of time, shrink for want of a better term. And I have replaced, when I say hundreds, I mean I would have replaced hundreds of gaskets because they have split and they've sucked air or they've been sucking oil. I've seen pistons torch because they've gone lean on a cylinder because of a split gasket. I personally avoid paper gaskets wherever I can. Now, there are situations where you have to use them. I'm not arguing that, but it is something I avoid. This one here, this one still had the factory tin gasket on it. The turkey tray, the metal gasket. Now, I'll give you one reason why I still like using the tin gasket, aside from what I've previously mentioned. See how much oil's been splashing up on here, the accumulation of shit. You're transferring heat into your intake manifold from the engine oil. On here, that turkey tray, your tin manifold gasket, it shields the manifold. it insulates it directly from oil heat. Now that's got to be worth a few horsepower. How much, I don't know, and the reason I don't know is because I always go out of my way to avoid that. I've never done a dyno test between the two under environmentally controlled conditions. But the less heat you transfer into here, the more horsepower you're going to make. And that's another one of the big advantages of the Cleveland with the, when I say dry, no water flow through the intake manifold, is it's not picking up coolant jacket heat into the front cylinders. I've got a 302 Windsor, which I'm going to do a 347 Straker kit in the not too distant future, and that's going to get quite a few intake manifold and gasket modifications to try and get rid of some of the heat transfer into the aluminium intake manifold. I'm going to pause you now, and we're going to bring up some of the aftermarket aluminium intake manifolds, and we'll talk about them for a bit. Okay, the initial comparison. This is cheap Chinese dual plane air gap. I say, as you can see, I can put my rule through. This is a Blue Thunder, which back in the day was highly desirable. I haven't tried this on a motor, I haven't tested it for fit, I haven't done anything yet. But let's look at the differences between the two, apart from the fact one's made in the US, one's made in China. What I've done is I've set both of these up on the China rails. They're up the same spacing, so you can get an idea. There is about 10 mil, 3/8 of an inch difference in carburetor flange height between the two. So that gives you a relatively good indication. Here we have, it's just me having a look at, it's just me throwing cylinder heads on the intake manifolds on the ground. Just having a quick look. The Blue Thunder uses the exact same layout, 2 outer, 2 inner on the high side, which is the exact opposite to what this air gap has. This is exactly opposite. The this one's high, this one's low, high, low, high, low, high, low, and conversely, too low, too high, too low, too high. Is that going to make a difference? Probably not. It's going to be more to do with how the manifolds themselves flow. This one here is marketed as 2V, 4V head. This particular one here is 4V only. So this one has a lot less port, a lot less cross section in the runners. It has a lot less material in the runners. Let's flip it over so you can see the differences. Okay, the differences are significant. This here is very much a 2V small port manifold. You don't have bugger all metal to work with. In fact, you probably have more metal to work with. I can't measure that at the moment. I would have to get the ultrasonic out. But there is more. It feels like there's actually more metal on the port wall on these than what there is on these, on this one. So that said, this manifold here does have an advantage in as much as the heat transfer between the valley and the intake manifold is reduced if you are not running a tin gasket. If you have a tin gasket in there, this one will still have a heat transfer advantage because it still has air going underneath it. This here only gets insulated from the oil splash if you are running a tin gasket. This manifold has been on and used, and interestingly enough, I can see that it's had the tin gasket on it because I can see the gunk off it. And there's no sign of oil splash on the bottom of this intake, on the bottom of this Blue Thunder. So that said, what we're going to do in a second is we will change some manifolds around, and we'll start looking at some single plane stuff. I'm not going to talk too much about the differences in ports because we'll get more into that when we get onto the single plane stuff. Now, what we have here, wind accelerator small port 2V, Edelbrock Talker 4V, large port, Holly strip dominator, large port. They did a street dominator version. I'm just going to, sorry guys, I'm just going to grab something. Another piece of Dexion just to level this out. Now, interestingly enough, when we're just looking at the air gap manifolds, like we're looking at that cheap Chinese one, this strip dominator has got so much air gap underneath it in the centre that it's still rocking, even though it's on the same China rail supports. What's going on here? There we go. Something's not quite square here. Probably the surface of the bench. All right. So let's start off with the trusty rule. Let's do a height comparison. The Edelbrock has the highest carburettor flange from the China rails. The accelerator is probably within a couple of mil, 80 thou, roughly a difference to the strip dominator. Now, we've got quite a few differences in the intake manifold, and this is one of the things that I haven't liked about the Edelbrock is that you'll notice the ports are very laid over compared to the strip dominator. The strip dominator ports stands a lot more vertically. The wind accelerator also is a lot more vertical. The accelerator has more radius in here, or appears to have more radius in here than what the strip dominator does. And there's good and bad about the way these ports sit, and because the Cleveland ports don't go the way they go in, what happens is, and we'll have a look at that later on, we'll line a intake manifold and a header, the airflow crashes into the side of the header and has to turn back more on the talker than it does on either of these these other two intake manifolds. I don't like it, but it may have its advantages. Basically what you had was a 6,000 RPM manifold, a 7,000 RPM manifold, and by memory these were an 8,000 RPM. We're talking hot top end revs as specified from the manufacturer. I've had these out to 7,000 in small port form. No problems at all. Although, when I say no problems at all, we're probably getting close to the absolute limits. I've never run the talker because I've never liked it, and these here flow enormous amounts of air before you start porting them. So we've had these well past 8,000, and there'll be plenty of people that tell you that these don't choke at 8,000, they just keep going. I'm going to put you on hold for a sec because I want to go and grab something. Okay, back again. I want these in a bit because these go with that. And we'll talk about alignments. Now, we will flip these over because we've had a look at the top side. So let's have a look at the bottom sides. You'll see both of these have got crossovers, heat riser crossovers in them. As I covered in the 302 closed chamber, 4V closed chamber head comparison, you don't need to spend hours trying to make block-ups for these. Just shoot the port full of Celastic, being my favourite, and in the cylinder head, or you can do the intake manifold, but personally I suggest the cylinder head, and your problems go away. That's on cylinder heads that have it. If you're using aftermarket, it doesn't matter, as in aftermarket aluminium heads. But if you've got a cast iron heads that are still running it, just shoot the port full of silicone. So in my case, I prefer Celastic. I find it works better than anything else I've tried otherwise. What is very noticeable in here is what appears to be horrendous porosity. There's a lot of porosity in the casting here. The Holy Manifolds casting looks a lot better, and likewise the Wind Accelerator manifold casting looks a lot better. Now, that's not to say all of these Edelbrock manifolds are cast like this, but this particular one here that I'm looking at, yeah, it's got quite a bit of porosity in it for some reason. But hey, it could be an outlier. And Edelbrock, let's be honest, Edelbrock do a lot of good stuff. So I'm more inclined to think that this is an outlier, and I don't know how old this manifold is. It could be decades old. You'll notice, again, when we're talking about port alignments, how different the radiuses are and the port shape is. The Edelbrock port is the 4V port. Let's grab the cup. Sorry, gentlemen. We're going to get in here a little bit. Wow. That Edelbrock port. Let's try a centre port. So we've got the centre port there. We're going to try, okay, that there gets me, I'm just touching as I go up to the, I can't quite reach the carburetor or the plenum again. Now, that actually, I'll come back to here. It's probably been a little bit harsh on the Edelbrock there. There we go. No. I wasn't actually. That's what I need on the Edelbrock. That's a Wind Accelerator. Now, this is the small port manifold, and you'll notice that we get into where my thumb is on the Edelbrock, depending on where we are on the port. The Edelbrock's got a little more taper in the port by the looks of it, but yeah, the extra port volume of the strip dominator is very apparent. Okay, so lots of port volume, not as much port volume, and obviously a lot less port volume. This is all going to lead into some other videos that we're going to make about how Clevelands work. But what we are going to talk about now is one of my favourite subjects, and I think one of the most least understood, or most poorly understood, is probably an equally important area of intake manifold work on all engines, not just Clevelands. We're going to talk about firing order versus firing sequence. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, assuming that we've got people who are experienced with Chevs and other brands. So, and the firing order on this engine, 1, 3, 7, 2, 6, 5, 4, 8, which is the HO firing order, 289 HO onwards by memory, which we basically didn't see here in Australia. So, but we're going to talk about what's going on in the intake manifold. So cylinder 1 fires first, then cylinder 3, so that's 2. 7, that's the third one in the sequence. Then we've got 4, cylinder number 2 is cylinder 4, 5, 6. So what you've got is the front part of this intake manifold gets hit 4, 5, 6, and 5 and 6 get hit here, side by side. Now when you are porting the intake manifold, you need to make an allowance for that. This here is also getting hammered. Because you're working, basically the front 2 barrels are getting drawn straight underneath at the same time, and the back 2 are trying to support it. So we've got cylinder number 6, and then we've got 7 and 8 are side by side. And again, so when you're porting these manifolds, I'd always do some biasing when I am get the Blue Thunder back. I always do some biasing when I'm porting the manifolds, and we'll put these around. Yep, that's the back because we've got the bolt mounts. Grab this, put a bit more angle on it for you. The reason that I've gone for the Blue Thunder is the Blue Thunder mirrors the factory manifold. I might just slide these to the centre a little bit more for you. Okay. All right. So, let's look. First one in the sequence is a low. The second one in the sequence here is a high on the dual plane. The third one in the sequence, we're back to a low on the dual plane. The fourth one in the sequence, we're back to a high. The fifth one in the sequence, we're back to a low. The sixth one in the sequence, we're back to a high. The seventh one in the sequence, we are back to a low. And the eighth one in the sequence, being cylinder 8, we're actually back to a high on the dual plane. Now, what difference does that make? What it means is that we don't get cylinder port robbing to the same degree on a dual plane that we do on a single plane. What it also means is that with the dual plane, all of this here fills up and becomes part of a plenum, becomes plenum volume for when the valve opens, as opposed to this being the plenum volume for the entire engine. So this is plenum volume for 2 cylinders. 2 cylinders, yes, there is transfer between the two. Let's not argue, let's not dispute that. And we're still drawing stuff through the carburetor, but this here increases plenum volume for both of these the 2 cylinders that are drawing off it. This increases plenum volume from the 2 cylinders that are drawing off it. All of the engine is trying to draw off this. As again, Charles' video quite often talks about the differences between high flow and low flow on intake manifolds when he's porting them, between high runners and low runners. It'd be a good idea to have a look at the stuff that he talks about. I'll talk a little bit more later on when I'll say later on in another video about some of the things about intake manifolds. How I'm not, while turtlebacks work very well in theory, and they do definitely, indisputably improve airflow, I'm not convinced that they improve fuel distribution. Fuel distribution is a slightly different factor, and that gets in some, depending on what fuel you are running, it will make a difference as to whether the turtleback will hurt your fuel distribution or help it, because it gets down to volume of fuel and droplet size, wetting, blah 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 blah. So there's a lot more in it, and we'll go into that. But porting of intake manifolds is something that we will talk about later, as we will with later in another video, as we will about cylinder heads. So this video is probably getting a bit long now. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe. There's a lot more we're going to talk about. Oh, one of the other things that I'll just very quickly talk about. Notice the reliefs in here between the two plenums. That is to help, that'll help your high-end horsepower to some degree. Now, one of the things that I do like about the Blue Thunder, where it's drilled through the port, through the for the brake line fitting for the vacuum drawer, it goes through into both ports. It's drilled into a high and a low. It goes into both sets of runners. So you've got effectively going into plenum for 4 cylinders. These Chinese ones, what I don't like is that front port is only going into cylinder number 5. This one here is going into cylinder number 8, and the problem is it's only into one cylinder. It's if you're using vacuum brakes and you're on the brakes a fair bit, what's going to happen is this cylinder here, number 8, is going to lean out. It's going to have air problems because you're going to be emitting air on the brake booster. If you put a PVC port into here, you are going to have problems. You really need to come up to this area here, probably run an adapter plate and even out the air draw through the top section of the plenum. So just something to bear in mind. But anyway, it's just something that I did mean to talk about it earlier, but I forgot all about it. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. I'm back again. I knew I forgot to talk about something. The port alignment. This is the Edelbrock Talker. This is the large port 4V closed chamber head. You'll notice this comes along not too bad here, because we've got port angle is pretty much like that. So at this end it's not too bad. Problem is when we get to this end, notice how it collides. The center ports, I wouldn't call either of them bad, but when we get to this one, because of the mirrored angle here, it collides badly. At this point, being a 4V and not having a lot of velocity compared to the small port head, it's not as big an issue as it possibly could be, but it will affect it in the high RPM. That said, we'll put you on hold and we'll move to a couple of other manifolds. So Now what we have is we have the wind accelerator small port 2V intake manifold, and you will notice that it comes around and it commences its turn earlier, and you get slightly better port alignment. I'm looking down the intake here, and the intake, or say I'm looking at the centre two, and the centre two look quite nice, but the again, you'll notice that the because of the way it's laid out, we get this slightly splayed layout that we did with the Edelbrock talker, but the arcing into here is smoother, for want of a better way of putting it. Now that said, depending on whose theory you're subscribing to, having this larger arc means that you'll move more fuel to the outside earlier, and you may possibly get more oil wetting. On this end here, what will happen is this here, because it's got, or with the talker, because it's going in straighter, it'll crash in here, and you'll get all your fuel wetting at this end. I'm suspecting that these two are probably closer in fuel distribution, wetting, atomization than what the talker is at similar RPM ranges, but the talker goes always specified for 1,000 RPM higher than what this here is from factory. We'll pause here and we'll change manifolds again. Okay, here we have the Blue Thunder. You'll notice that Blue Thunder dual plane, you'll notice with the dual plane that the run in here to the ports is a lot kinder, for want of a better way of putting it. Now, yes, I know that the single plane manifold has a bit higher RPM potential, but I suppose what I'm saying is don't overlook some of the benefits of the dual plane manifold for lower RPM and street RPM performance. I haven't played with this one here yet to see what we can get out of it, but it will be interesting. This may even end up on one of my street motors yet, so we'll see what we do with it. I've got a plan for it and probably these heads. I've got another set of heads, another set of 4V heads that I might have a play with, but I think these are going to be the ones I'm going to use instead. So, yeah, anyway, might throw the strip dominator on. Strip dominator, we're going to have a look from the other side. Okay. Port centre to valve centre, approximately. So you'll notice with the strip dominator, unfortunately, because of the fact it's an air gap, we can't look at it from the bottom side, which makes it harder to work out what's going on. But you can see through here, and there might be a bit of parallax in it because I'm looking at it from a different angle to you are. What we have is we've had to turn the head around, so you're looking at everything backwards. This is the bad lineup. This is the better lineup. Okay, so you will see that you've got a slight S into here, and here you've got a C. Now, when you look at it, the disadvantages of this are probably equalised out by the disadvantages of that. But without flying the two of them on the head to see what the airflow is doing, and then having it on the dyno and looking at what the air-fuel ratios are for both cylinders, there's a lot of theoretical stuff to put there together, and I've never had a dyno which has been well enough instrumentated to look at air fuel ratios for both of these cylinders on one of these in a sustained high RPM application. So yeah, we'll just put you on pause again. Now, we've just put the talker back on, and you can see the difference between the two. It's more of an observation than it is anything. I'm just looking in here. It's a little unattractive up there. I hope my head wasn't in the way. But yeah. Anyway, we'll call this the end of the video. I think you've seen enough. I think we can talk about it a bit more later on in the future, and probably in the comments. So thanks very much for watching, and please subscribe.